Thanks everyone so far who's joined. So welcome to Leeds Digital Fest 2022. This is our BJSS event on creating responsible tech and creating sustainable tech. So my name is Daniel Yip. I'm a software developer at BJSS. I've been here for just over a year. And yeah, I hope you're as excited as I am to hear from the two speakers that we've got lined up on two different topics. So the first topic that we've got is sustainability by design. So that one we're going to have from Joe Murray. So this will be taking a look at how we ensure sustainability considerations are taken into account throughout the kind of design life cycle, and also looking at how we can sort of work with organizations on that zero carbon journey, and equally crucially, sort of how to drive out wastage throughout those processes. Then secondly, and on a similar note, looking at how we can sort of create a more sustainable society, we're looking at the next topic of designing technology is designing society. So that one we'll have from Colin Cripps. So in this talk, we'll be looking to sort of define what exactly is meant when we say responsible tech, and how we also make sure that the sort of concerns about the impact that the products and services we make, how those societal impacts, we can make sure that they're sort of kept front and center. So just a bit of background on the two speakers we've got before we dive into it. So first of all, we've got Joe Murray, who's our current lead at BJSS for operations transformation and sustainability practice. So he's got a wealth of experience over many years on both like sort of complex transformation projects and also across a wide variety of sectors. And then we've also got Colin, who's a technology consultant at BJSS. He's got a background in analysis, design, and agile delivery, and he's currently working as well in that transformation and sustainability space, and also has a big focus on human-centered design. So really glad we have both of them joining, and looking forward to hearing what they have to say. So I think, as always, if you've got any questions, feel free to hold on to them to the end. We'll have a bit of time for a Q&A, but equally you can just pop them down in the chat while they're talking. I'll be sort of collating those, and we'll go through those at the end. So with no further ado, I'll pass on to Joe with the first talk.
Thank you, Dan. Thanks very much. So I won't reintroduce myself, but so you can see my screen. Can you see that okay, everybody? Yeah, thank you. So I'm Joe Murray, and I'm responsible for the end-to-end delivery of sustainability for BJSS. And the reason I'm talking here is, as the largest privately owned tech consultancy, BJSS takes sustainability very, very, very seriously. But actually what I want to try to talk through, and hopefully have some questions and healthy discussion, is it's not just focusing on tech, it's focusing on the whole enterprise, for the whole end-to-end value chain. So what I intend to go through over the next 15 to 20 minutes is our strategic approach and how tech can feed into that. And then Colin will follow up with more specific on responsible technology. And as Dan says, I'm happy to answer any questions as we go along. But thank you for attending. So firstly, what is sustainability by design? Well, I'm not here to prove the science, but what I'm here to discuss is, look, as organizations, as a society, we all intrinsically know, and we all definitely know that we've got a responsibility to look after the planet. And the drive from the UN SDGs and from some of the major companies and corporations around the world, it's quite clear that organizations are trying to drive down their carbon use and get towards their net zero goals. And when you look at the challenge and the scale of the challenge, here I'm using the word organizational, but actually what we're really talking about is communities, circular communities, circular economies, and how we interact on the planet. But actually, where can we help? What action can we take as people? Well, actually, looking at individual organizations, every organization or most organizations have set net zero ambitions. So how do they target getting down to zero? Where are their opportunities? How do they actually achieve their strategy? And when you look at organizations and you look at people like myself and my children and everybody who cares about the future of this planet, you start to think, well, actually, a unsustainable company which hasn't got an op model or operations which are sustainable, have they really got much of a future? Or will we move away through legislation? Or will buyers move away from their products because they're just not simply clean enough or doing enough? And I've been around for a while, so thanks for making me feel a bit older, Dan. But the change programs that I've been involved in, if you really look at it, a lot of people talk about customer experience, a lot of people talk about efficiencies, and a lot of people talk about cost savings. And if we want to get serious about driving carbon out and driving towards net zero, we need to have a more balanced approach. So when we're doing projects, we need to start looking at not just cost, not just those elements I spoke about, but actually let's start really focusing on carbon savings as well. So within BJSS, moving to the right of this slide, we are perfectly positioned to help drive waste and carbon out of the end-to-end value chain. And what we can do, we can come in and we can help assess, and let's face it, that's the first stage, assess what the current state of operations and op models are, how much is actually being pumped into the environment, where are the opportunities to improve. And then using our suite of capabilities from consulting, from the Spark our design thinkers, all the way through from our managed services and our significant technical abilities, we can help you design your end-to-end op model, your processes, in order to enable you to drive carbon out and waste out by design. So we can help you redesign to be as clean as you possibly can be and balance that against cost and your business priorities. Building on from that, we have significant delivery and project management experience. So we know exactly how to deliver change. We know how to design it, we know how to plan for it, and we know how to deliver it. And we know how to focus on reducing scope 1 to 3 emissions. And then finally, as a supplier, we like to work in partnership with our clients and actually pass on that knowledge and pass on that capability. Because actually, in order to get to the route zero of net zero, we need to make sure everybody's got ownership of this. So we like to build capability, continuous improvements, and center of excellence, and leave our customers and clients in a better place so they can do it to themselves. So that's the overview of our sustainability by design. But so what? Lots of people talk about we need to drive out net zero, but how do you actually do it? Now, what we try to do here on this slide is the boilerplate of how we actually achieve it. Some people say it looks like a watch. I like boxing, it looks like a boxing belt. But the important piece here is from left to right, this represents the whole value chain of an organization. Looking at the left of this slide, what we can do is look at the whole organization or any specific element of an organization which a client or partner wants us to look at. We then move right and we apply our sustainability by design methodology. And we work with individuals and we work with clients and we work with partners, and we have a 4-stage process. So we help them strategize. We help them work on their strategic goals. We help them work on their vision and their purpose, or we can help align to their already existing strategy. So first, what's the strategy? What's your purpose and where do you want to go? Moving on from that, that's where we look with our expertise and we look and do analysis and design. So we look at the current state, we look for opportunities to improve, and then we redesign the best possible organization we can and deliver it. We then transform and operationalize. So working with our partners and working with our customers and clients, we will help them transform. And finally, but not least, we embed learning and improvement and establish centers of excellence. So we work with our clients to actually build that capability and that culture within in order to drive sustainable benefits and continuous improvements to get better and better as time goes by. And we've done this many times before. And looking at the bottom of the sort of like circle element, we know there are certain areas which are really, really heavy on carbon. So you can see, I'm not going to talk them all through from here, but tech and data hosting, supply chain, energy consumption, travel, logistics, and you can see opportunities for documentation and communication. But we know the levers that to look at and to target areas that we can pull. And then moving to the right, I just mentioned the levers, but actually our specialities of, we've got people who can go in and do process optimization. We've got individuals who know how to optimize supplier management. We have got significant technological capability where we can do end-to-end digitization. And as you see, just pulling out a few more pieces, we've got migration to cloud, we've got significant capability and offers in that space, and we know how to optimize tech. But at the end of it, what's key for us is we help our customers and partners to actually deliver on their strategy and purpose, to give them as sustainable op model as we possibly can, and leave them with processes and services that have been designed to give them sustainable operations. Now, so what? But to put a bit more flavour onto the bone, And when I talk about a sustainable op model, well, we've got an 8-component view which we apply when we go through organizations. Top left is business processes. So effectively, we look at all of the processes or elements of processes, and by design, we remove that waste to ensure it's as most efficient as it possibly can be. Organizational design. We look at the shape of the organization. We make sure that the management's in the right level of management oversight and roles are there, and we ensure that the organizational design is fit for purpose, but also to make sure the company's sustainable. Technology, architecture, and third parties. Again, looking at this, we can look at actually how you build your infrastructure, what infrastructure you use, evaluate what you've currently got in your estate, and actually work with you to build, source, and configure the most optimal solution, both from a financial and carbon point of view. I mentioned it earlier about, how do you baseline what your carbon output is, but actually it's really important to report that. And with our knowledge, and I'll go into a bit more detail later on, we can help you identify different scope 1, 2, 3 and different subcategories of emissions and help you build more effective reporting and control of those. Moving to the right of the op model, channels. So, and I'll go into an example on this, optimizing how you communicate with customers. How do you drive out paper? How do you drive out in-person meetings? And how do you actually think sustainability first in your decisions? Mentioned it earlier, but leadership and culture, probably the most important part actually. If we can instill the right culture and it's actually championed by leadership, that's absolutely key to drive it forward. Physical infrastructure, so not only driving down transportation waste between locations, but also how do you set up your infrastructure and your real estate to ensure that you're as green as you possibly can be. And then finally, and not least, insights, data and measures. Again, it's linked very closely to the environmental, social and governance, but actually how is your data managed? Firstly, how is it hosted? Is that the most efficient way? How is it used? How are you reported on? And are there any solutions that could actually optimize your performance? So they're the eight components of our sustainable op model. But one of the key areas is actually really getting stuck in and really driving out waste at an individual process level. And at BJSS, we've got a methodology called SEOD. So that stands for strategize, eliminate, optimize, digitize, and then standardize your processes. And effectively here, we use experts in lean, experts in process excellence and agile delivery methodologies. And we look to ensure, number one, are you doing the right things? In our experience, you have lots of historic catalogue items which could be removed, which no longer align with business strategy or its purpose. So actually we do a review before anything else. Is this process, is this business service actually still relevant? We then work with our experts, excuse me, and we eliminate the waste. So eliminating waste does two things normally. It saves you money, it saves you time, it improves experience, and it will drive out carbon. We then optimize that. So we optimize the workflow of any processes, and then we follow up quickly with any digital or technological solutions where we can actually further save money, further improve time, but importantly, drive out energy usage and drive out carbon. And then finally, we look to standardize processes and operations across the business. Again, this is the same benefits I just mentioned, but the standardization stops variation and ensures that we actually maximize carbon savings. And as you can see at the bottom, there are some very sort of like low-hanging fruit and very basic type stuff where actually we can really drive significant savings easily. But just to talk this through, because I've spoke quite a bit at a higher level. So people in my team, including myself, this is a real life example of just how simple this can be. So we were working at a global retail bank, and the global retail bank were trying to primarily cut costs. And on the analysis of our team, we found out that they sent about 1 million letters to customers per year. And these letters were made up of virgin paper and disposed of via landfill. And what we realized was the annual cost of this was £660,000 a year. So a significant cost of sending paper-based communications to expatriate customers. And when you look at the carbon impact of that, and that's materials delivery and disposal, you can see that that was enough for just over 3,000 trees for 2 years to offset. So significant impact both financially and customer experience and carbon-wise for the business. So what we did some analysis, and we come up with some really clear recommendations and implemented it as well. So we assumed that we could switch 50% of those individuals to online using an existing banking app they already had, but they just didn't put them onto it, just with a 50% reduction. And then for any residual paper users, we moved them to recycled paper. And then we looked at trying to increase, our productivity and reducing the volume and the paper wastage. We looked to optimize what they actually sent, and could it be double-sided, small envelopes, and went to that level of sort of like detail. And then when you move to the actual impact of just doing this simple change, we halved the CO2 emissions just by using an app they already had built and were already using. And we removed £330,000 of direct spend for that global bank. So again, that's an example of something which can be really, really simple. And if the bank didn't have the app, we could have built an app very simply with the capability of BJSS. So just a food for thought here of just how simple it could be. And actually just changing communication methods could have a significant financial followed by carbon impact. Before I wrap up and hand over to Dan and Colin, I think it's putting David Attenborough on a slide actually brought it home for me, because never before have we had the knowledge of what we're doing to the planet and the negative impact we're having, but never before have we got the knowledge, the know-how, and the technical capability to make a difference. And anyone who's got any thoughts or any discussion points you'd like to discuss about this, it's something that I care passionately about, I'm happy, and you can reach out and get my contact details later. But thank you for listening, and any questions I'll answer, but I'll hand over to Dan now. Thank you.
Thanks so much for that, Joe. And, yeah, really critical kind of quotation to end on, really underscores the importance of the moment we're currently in. So thanks very much for that. And what I'll do, I'll open the floor now to Colin for the next talk on designing technology is designing society.
Cool, thank you, Dan. 2 seconds, let me just share my screen. Can you see that?
Yeah, okay.
Oh, cool, thank you. Has actually loaded the presentation mode. Yeah, hopefully you're seeing the presentation, not my notes, which are quite crude. Cool, so yeah, responsible tech, designing technology is designing society. So what we're going to talk about today is just help define what responsible technology is. Why should
we can see your the notes rather than the slides.
2 seconds, thank you. Hopefully that has sorted it out.
Yeah, yes.
Cool, fab. So yeah, what are we talking about? What is responsible technology? I'm going to try and help give us a shared definition of that. Talk about why we should care, what we can do about that, and wrapping up with a little bit of question and Q&A at the end of that. First off, I'll introduce myself slightly. So obviously, Colin, I work at BJSS, been here for over 4 years now, working across design, analysis, strategy, and digital transformation. A little bit about me, I do a lot of kickboxing, I like to run, and I rescue a lot of expatriate hens. Here's a little picture of them, completely irrelevant, but I like to tell people about it because I like rescuing chickens and recommend people do it too. But moving on to something that is a little bit more important to us today. So what is responsible technology? This is the definition I like to point people to. It's about creating products and services that better align with our societal values and expectations. So that's both at a society level, but also at an individual level. And that's important because what we're doing does actually affect people all the time. And I'll go into some detail about that later on with some examples of how technology is integrated across everything that we do day to day, regardless of how we live our lives at the moment. But why is it important? Why should we care about this? Well, because when we start to create technology products and they disagree or they conflict and cause friction between our values and our expectations, some things start to go wrong. Like when LinkedIn decided to automatically mark job applications not fit for people because they were out of the country. Given that we're all working remotely, that seems like a strange thing to do. And there was lots of annoyance obviously around that, and potentially people missed opportunities to jobs which they were perfectly capable of doing, and companies missed out on great candidates because of some decision that was made without thinking of the consequences fully. Apple released a credit card, but it didn't think through how its algorithm was sexist towards women, meaning they were less able to get credit than men were from that card, despite having the same backgrounds and everything like that. So it was purely discriminating against them because the consequences of that check weren't thought through. A couple other examples, you'll probably all remember this one from when the Home Office was made to drop its algorithm that helped process visa applications and decisions because it was red flagging certain demographics more than others, which was obviously creating a vicious feedback loop due to the data that they were inputting into it, and that being flawed and leading to more and more discrimination. Another one that really highlights how some product design really can conflict with our values sometimes, and lots of people start to argue with that as a backlash. This was when Apple said that they were going to start scanning photos on the device, all of the photos that you had on your device in iCloud, so that they could help protect children from obviously inappropriate imaging. That caused a lot of concern because it obviously opens a potential backdoor for governments to start asking Apple to surveil photos for different reasons, and Apple would have lost its ability to say we physically can't do that and we're technologically not able to do that. And so this is the sort of thing that can happen when we're designing technology without thinking about the effect of that on our values and our expectations from a societal perspective. But why does that specifically matter to us? We work in technology. We are designers, we're technologists, we're engineers, we're making products. And so our design choices matter. We have a lot of responsibility. With great power comes great responsibility, especially when you talk about the scale of some of these things and some of these technology products that are out there and services that companies create. They're really affecting a lot of people at scale. So, we're talking about access to fundamental services, job opportunity, pure frustration from customers' perspective sometimes, and, general feelings of inclusion, representation, and identity. How people are not thinking about those sorts of things when they're designing a product because it's not at the forefront and center of their product design lifecycle. So they need to think about how they start to prioritize these elements. Speaking to customer frustration, I'll give you a couple of examples here and a couple of other examples about where design choices, again, weren't thought through. So I think I speak for all of us when it's a particularly frustrating experience booking a flight, which has a terrible, deceptive UX pattern. It's not being transparent, and it's not respecting the user's actual goal when they're doing it. And we could make a much nicer product with a much cleaner UX if we started to think about things in a different way rather than just thinking about upselling all the time. A different example, schools were looking for more efficient ways to charge and capture which children were paying for school meals, as they introduced facial recognition technology. This is a very invasive piece of technology, and perhaps the safeguards and regulation weren't there to say that should be in schools, because this is something that was developed for military use originally, and surveillance of citizens, and now we're pointing it at school children just so they can pay for meals day to day. And so obviously that caused a lot of worry. Another example, all those cookie banners. If you ever actually sometimes click into them rather than just clicking OK, which I'll be honest, I often just click OK. But for this, I clicked into one. I was particularly shocked at just how many there are there. And that's just highlighting that there are hundreds of companies that are tracking us. And that's because a company isn't being transparent, not being open to us about what they're actually doing and what they are recording and the value that they're getting from the data that we're giving them from interacting with with their product. So maybe they should be more open and transparent about that. But going back to the more fundamentals thing there of representation and inclusion, I know if you start to design input forms for anything and your name doesn't have a standard, isn't full of standard characters, you can get referred to in quite annoying, frustrating ways, which lots of people could say isn't a big deal, and it's a very minority group of people. Potentially, if you're building for a service where it's unusual to have different characters in that name. But imagine how frustrating and unsatisfying it is for a customer to always be referred wrong wrongly in their emails and communications from you. And that could be talking about things that, they're not just doing out of choice. They're not just buying a pair of jeans. They might be trying to upload their CV to somewhere to get a job, but actually that's never calling them the correct thing. It's never recording their name correctly. Maybe they can't log in because of that, which means they can't access and update their profile because usernames being matched incorrectly due to us not thinking about those types of characters in input forms. So it's a nice, simple example that shows quite the extent of how much can actually go wrong if we don't think about this stuff. But I've given you quite a lot of examples of where it can go wrong if we don't think about this stuff and how there's clashes with society or individual values. But ultimately, the other part of responsible technology is to minimize harm and to maximize the benefit for people. So with these sorts of things, we have a lot of opportunity as well as responsibility to influence and create tech that is, better holistically in a sustainable sense. It's more responsible and it's more environmentally friendly. So let's turn a little bit more to what we can do about it. As an organization, we can start to follow these 3 different pillars that I always like to refer to when I'm discussing this across BJSS and Spark. Let's raise awareness strategically from the leadership perspective. We have a voice to talk about these sorts of things. We can set strategic direction and goals. We can enforce and create frameworks that help facilitate this conversation in a structured way and gives people that might be afraid to raise their voice the ability to do so. But then the next most important thing is once you're aware of the topic and you've got the support to start talking about it because those fundamentals are there, how do you actually talk about it in a structured way? Well, we need to educate ourselves. We need to educate each other. We need to educate our customers and the companies that we work with and their teams so that they can start to be aware of how to combat these things as well. So what sort of things can you do? You can start to look at the tools and techniques that are out there. We can start to upskill ourselves. I always point people first to consequence scanning, which is a super exercise. Basically an agile ceremony that asks a few questions that creates the space for you to actually think about the consequences of your product. So what are the potential good benefits or good consequences of this product? What are the bad ones? And which ones of these do you want to mitigate? And that short question set just enables you to stop, pause, and actually create space to think about the consequences of your designing decisions. And it's not necessarily there to be solved right there and then, but it's there to raise light to them, put them under the lens so that you can take proactive decisions rather than reacting to these things. And that could be as little as we need to discuss that and we need to talk about that too with different people so that we're more aware of how to react to this when it does occur, but we still want to go ahead with something. That's okay, but again, it's coming from a point of power and a point of proactiveness rather than reaction again. There's a load of techniques and tools out there. Ethical OS is a great one. Digital Ethics Canvas is a nice one. The government's put loads of things out there with regards to frameworks and techniques from how you should be managing data and how you should be designing AI. And that's across the world as well. Lots of governments coming out with different frameworks for AI perspectives. And so it's nice to see that there's lots of potential documentation out there you can refer to. Fairlearn is another really nice thing, which is an open source project that helps kind of data scientists create a better, fair AI system and approach to data sets. But it's nice because it's obviously open source and community led. So they're helping feed into each other to improve each other. But importantly, once we're aware, we have a structure and a framework to talk about this stuff. We're educated with our tools and techniques so we can talk to each other. We know how to combat these. How do we actually bring that stuff into our operations? How do we start to think about greener architecture and think about making our products more sustainable? Well, we need to start bringing that into our operations. And there's some ways that we can do that. You can educate ourselves again around actual principles of green architecture and things like that. But you can also start to fundamentally bring things in like sustainability NFRs. So maybe we actually want to start to caveat not just the speed in which a page needs to load, but also the page weight and the carbon cost of that page. Maybe we need to actually limit that and we should set a standard against it so that it can't go above this. And then we're actually testing for and against these things. We can take objective stances against them and have an awareness of our costs holistically, because we're actually putting in some NFRs proactively again. You can take objective accountability for this stuff by measuring it, and holding yourself accountable for it. Something that I like to do is just add an E for ethical design risks into your RAID log. So it again creates the space that now we have the tools and techniques to challenge ourselves when we're designing things. We can actually also start to record those in our risk log. This is something that we've noticed. The product design is still going through sprints, but that's fine. It's logged on our RAID, and we'll start to think about this and try to mitigate that before releases. And so you can circle back on yourself to make sure that you're always aware and always combating these things going forward. The next stuff is to make sure that we actually do measure ourselves and hold ourselves accountable. So, you can have KPIs around this sort of stuff. You can set these as measures for success that not only is a product being designed and developed, delivered, but it's also potentially a measure of success is that it's doing this thing for a customer whilst limiting emissions in a certain amount, or only putting out an emissions to a certain level. We can complement that with both qualitative and quantitative feedback by having educated teams go out there and do user research that in an informed perspective that actually ask customers potentially, would you rather slightly less good quality pictures if you know that it's saving this amount of carbon? Would you mind this type of font because it's a lower page weight to load this style of website in this font instead? These sorts of questions give customers the voice to actually bring into our product design as well. It enables us to design in a human-centered way, really focusing on the stuff that is important from a sustainability and responsibility perspective, as well as delivering on our customer satisfaction objectives and, generally building good products, which is obviously what all companies want to do when they're launching new technology anyway. So that's the structure. I always like to say that we should approach these things, become aware, educate ourselves more, learn what's out there. And then once we have those tools and techniques in our arsenal, in our toolbox, we start to bring them into operations in structured ways. And maybe that's start to wrapping a process around it so that we can actually always bring in these things. It's not ad hoc. It's not just every 3 sprints we think of the consequence scanning. It's, every epic when that's coming in, we start to think about this stuff and we do it in and we can iterate our design based on that. So what could this look like? This is a little crude example that I just put together for this, but it shows the desire that I want us to get to, which is where product design and feature discovery is based around not just customer satisfaction, but also things around responsible objectives, responsible measures of success, and sustainability, KPIs, and things like that. So in this example, it's common if you have appointment bookings, that it's a high cost when no shows occur. A simple example could be to send notifications to users or customers to say that actually you've got an appointment. Here's a reminder for it. It's occurring tomorrow at 10 o'clock. Make sure you turn up or cancel it now. Okay, that's great. Now we've got that responsibility toolkit in our head as well. Well, actually, what's the carbon cost of sending out push notifications to 10,000 customers every hour? Well, it does cost this, it costs X. That's the objective answer to that. And then so we can start to think about that and start to measure that when we build our products. So we are taking the proactive decision. Yes, we still want to go forward with the push notifications because we need to limit the cost of appointment no-shows. Okay, that's fine. But let's measure the effect on it. Maybe we could put some analytics in around it to inform us on the effectiveness of those push notifications versus the carbon cost. Maybe there's a threshold or a ratio where actually we don't want to send more push notifications because it's costing too much carbon. We can stop ourselves there. Or we could do a sort of A/B test around it. Maybe we send 2 notifications to customers, or we send 4 push notifications to customers. Let's see the effectiveness of both of those. And actually, we might notice from measuring that only sending 2 has just about the same effect as sending 4, but it saved us half the emissions from that push notification process. So we've actually then got informed information and measured outputs that we can use to iterate our design. So we're making informed decisions that are in line with the values that we set ourselves, and they're informed from a way that is actually using responsible design toolkits that we've got in our head. So it's not just ad hoc, we're wrapping a process around this and making structure so that we can actually make responsible iterated design decisions and make sure that our discovery and feature designs factor this stuff in. The pink box is just on the right there. Responsible design nurtures trust, and trust nurtures loyalty, and loyalty nurtures sustainable long-term growth. So if we start to voice these things back to customers, let them know what we're doing, we are measuring the carbon cost of this. Do you need these notifications? Letting them take part in that journey. They might be really interested in that information and say, actually, send me less notifications. I'll be more aware because I want to save on the emissions cost of that. And that sort of transparency, it nurtures trust, which nurtures long-term growth. So that's a nice way to also bring back into the design process that it's not a dichotomy of profits versus design. We can bring customers into this journey to show what we're doing and why we're doing it. So that takes me to the next piece of, when we do this, we can have quite a big impact. We can create better products, but we can also think quite grandly and think, let's just design things which really are trying to just maximize benefit. So this is a cool thing that I saw on somebody sharing on LinkedIn the other day. I've not actually tried it out, so don't ask me how good it is, but it sounded very good. It's an add-on in Chrome, which just allows you to go into your DevTools and check the carbon cost of that website. It gives you recommendations based on a load of different categories. So then you can start to make informed decisions. You can use that as part of your toolkit, and your objective measurements to say, actually, we need to start to think about this stuff. This has identified the page load time is taking this, and it's this high in cost. And it's given us a low grade on sustainability, whereas actually our objectives here for sustainability on this site were to be at this grade. So we need to start to make some changes. And this is the information we have now to start making those decisions. Another thing I got from a previous presentation that I went to see from Make Impact is just maybe we could blur the images slightly, and that would reduce the quality very slightly, but retain 96% of it, but it's 76% smaller from a size cost, which reduces the carbon impact on there. So, these sorts of design decisions start to have a big impact. This is a great one that I always like to refer people to. It's not necessarily a technology product, but I think a really important thing that people noticed and took design decisions around. So Starling Bank, the team there and the CEO particularly, they noticed that the media was talking to women and men differently about money. And so they created a library of stock images that were free to use that talk more objectively about money to both men and women in the same way, rather than referring to different matters differently, referring to the same matter differently, whether they were targeting their media towards men and women. It's just a free thing they put out there to try and make a difference in that space. This one, slightly ironic that it's coming from VW, but for their Canadian electrical vehicle site, they have a sustainable version that you can go on. So it's all made in low carbon or carbon efficient digital experience, as they call it, which is just limiting the emissions of that site. And obviously that's feeding on the idea that somebody's looking for an EV vehicle. So they're probably concerned about the sustainability impact of their customer journeys and what they're doing. But this is educating customers there that actually the website is quite an intensive thing. So they've designed a different version to show that you can limit the emissions that you're creating just by interacting with our site. It's a nice thing to put out there. This one as well, I noticed people were obviously noticing that that blind users or blind customers and blind fans weren't able to interact with tennis so well. So the Australian Open introduced some technology that enabled them to if I remember correctly, it was basically putting different sounds on different types of shots, and it was enabling them to follow the journey, and the ball bounces much more effectively than they were ever previously able to. So they're able to engage with Australian Open's tennis tournaments. So it's a great thing to put out there, and it's the sort of impact that we can have on people, from a large impact, but also to an individual impact, when we just start to think about the design decisions and what benefit we can maximize and what harm we can minimize just by designing products slightly differently and putting a different lens onto it. So finally, I'll leave you with just a quote from a course that I went on a few years ago, looking at the philosophy of technology, which really gave me a good language to talk about this sort of concepts and struggles with, but I think is an important thing. So from the professor there, it's just any technology helps to shape human actions and experiences, and therefore it will have an impact that can be understood in ethical terms. So ultimately, designers are materializing morality. So we need to be aware of that. And it's part of our responsibility as designers, technologists, to start to be aware of that responsibility and take action in the best way possible around that. So thank you very much. And just, I'll hand back over to Dan for any questions.
Yeah, thanks very much, Colin. Yeah, plenty of food for thought, and really good to see how you can sort of integrate those processes into the agile delivery process. Certainly certain things I'll be wanting to take away from that. So yeah, a couple of questions from the Q&A as well. If anyone else also wants to pop anything, feel free. There's the chat or the Q&A, which just comes directly to us. But the first question we've got, so I think I'll open it up to both of you, but sort of in terms of what it's sort of directed at, I guess, Joe, you mentioned that more granular kind of case study looking at the work we did with a particular bank to lower their carbon impact. So there it seems they had been fairly receptive, or at least there are a lot of positive impacts that came out of it. But I think what someone's wanted to ask is, what's the biggest kind of blocker or frustration you see in regards to companies driving down their environmental impact?
Actually, no, thanks. And that's a really, actually, I'm going to just jot the main point down there. That's a really good question, actually. I think if we take a step back, most of the large companies that we see are making climate pledges, and we've heard the word greenwash quite a lot. So big companies say we're going to be net zero by 2025, 2030. That's fine. But actually, what are they doing about it? So have they got an actionable plan where they can actually drive out their carbon and drive out cost and carbon actually, and actually get towards their strategic aims? And I think that the frustration I've got in the blocker is actually when we speak to some clients, they haven't got that plan. So they've got a strategy, but no viable plan. And again, that's why we're trying to help them get to that target. But if I was to say my major frustration and the major blocker probably is everyone seems to be waiting for one great plan, one great idea. You know, we're going to come in, we're going to do this, we're going to drive it out. I think what Colin brought us through there, and he had lots of examples, was what I call incremental gains. So the small things that every single person on this call can do, just to maximize how green they are and to reduce carbon. You know, you can do small things individually. You can decide to walk to work. You can decide, you know, to not go into work as often, not make as many coffees. It goes as simple as that. And before you know it, you add all of those little things up, or you make conscious choices at work not to use paper, or you make conscious choices at work not to send big attachments on emails. You send links, for example, and you're never going to get an encompassing plan which drives out every single element of carbon of an organization. But I think the onus is on individuals. And sometimes I think it's that culture, and big changes start with lots of little actions from individuals. So my answer to that is there's not going to be one great holistic plan which solves everything. I think the onus is on every single person on the planet, effectively, to do incremental small changes. Bit of a long answer to a simple question, but it's very complex. Very good question. Thank you.
You want me to chip in there as well, Dan, from my perspective? I'll do it anyway. Yeah, I think my side on it is often people skip that middle stage that I spoke about. So there's awareness, there's kind of strategic desire from an individual perspective or from a leadership perspective. You know, that's awesome. And then they want to skip straight to operationalizing that. But they've not spent the time to think about how do we actually educate our teams and our employees to know how to do this. You know, it's really complicated stuff to think about the consequences of your design, right? Think about it in all the other things that we do from tech delivery perspective. You know, when we talk about the maturity of people delivering in an agile way, you know, that's a whole gauge of how far along that scope you are. We need to give people the tools and techniques to be able to do it better. So we can't just have a leadership say, let's do agile, and then we're delivering an agile, because you need teams to know how to do that, what it means to be working in sprints. And it's the same from a responsible design perspective, that people need to understand the tools and techniques to assess the consequences of what they're doing. They need to start to be aware of the things of what makes a data set bias. If you're going to start to be building a machine learning algorithm, you need to be thinking about these sorts of things. So that's probably my frustration.
Thanks very much. We had another question come in as well. I think this is looking in particular at the operations sustainability side of things. So the question is, could we try to make sure we're leaving less idle resources to reduce our carbon footprints? Again, I'll open that one up.
Yeah, and I think that's another great question. So if you remember the slides, etc., I went through in our approach where we go into looking at the operations, the service design of some of the services people do and the op models, definitely. So you don't always have to have a really fancy technological solution. Actually, some of this comes down to exactly that. So, and you do that by analysis. You do that by understanding what the operation is, where the lean time is, applying lean principles to get rid of downtime and maximize efficiency. So absolutely, it's one of the first steps you do. You look at the as is, you identify those areas, and you work to eliminate them. So whoever asked that question, again, that's a spot on question, because what you do, you get rid of that and then you optimize what's left. So that is an essential part of anyone who should be trying to drive out carbon. Another good question, Dan. Colin, do you have anything on that?
No, I think I'd probably just echo what you said, so it's no point really repeating that. Thank you.
And then another question we've got, I think we're getting towards the end of them now. So it's just a general query as to sort of they've got an interest in this space on responsible and sustainable tech. So are there any either recent books, podcasts, or sort of people you think worth following in the area, worth learning more about?
I'll jump in there. I know certainly there's a great book I'm reading at the moment, or listening to at the moment. I'll be honest, I use Audible more than read. But Stephanie Hare released a book recently called Technology is Neutral or Not Neutral. I can't actually remember the title, but it's that. But it's a really super interesting book, and she uses lots of case studies, deep dives into kind of quite pervasive, but also quite prevalent technologies that are really cool. Things like facial recognition that are really useful technologies potentially. She uses a framework of philosophy to kind of look at how we can analyze these sorts of things from a critical perspective and see whether the technology is really neutral in of itself, or if it's just the application that makes it good or bad. And then she starts to draw some conclusions from that. But I'm only halfway through, but at the moment where she's introduced the framework, it gives you an actual lens and a toolkit again to start to have these discussions and decision-making conversations, which is useful. Lots of books I've read are super interesting, but they don't give you that toolkit. They're just loads of great examples of where it's gone good or gone bad, but not how you improve things. So I'd really recommend that one.
Thanks very much. Joe, did you have anything you wanted to jump in on that one?
No, I think you've got lots of books and lots of publications out there which raise awareness, and actually numerous ones. You can go from strategic macro level of how the environment works across the earth and how the science works, all the way down to different opinions and different approaches. My thing there is, you can Google and find a list of books of whatever you want to look at, and I do promote that. Educate. If you don't know anything, educate yourself, go out there and read it and actually build your knowledge up. I think the difficulty comes is in the toolkit and how you actually do it. I think if you look at organizations and actually consultancies who tend to be the tip of the spear on this, actually delivering environmental changes is relatively new. So actually really develop toolkits of how to do that. There are very few of us who can implement those changes. And I think there's going to be an awful lot of trial and error, test and learn moving forward. My advice to that question is I don't think you can go far wrong from good process optimization and lean principles in actually doing the driving out of the waste. So I would say look at the capability of lean Six Sigma, process excellence, because that's the exact skill set you need to actually drive out waste from processes. And then different areas, what you might be interested in, cloud technology, building websites, they all have their specific element of how you do that to reduce carbon. So yeah, I just say get out there and start researching what you want to know about.
I think that takes us through all of our questions we've got. So I'll hand over now to Donna, who's going to wrap up.
Thank you very much, Dan. So I'm Donna Tosney, I'm the Leeds Regional Capability Lead. Really, just to wrap up, I'd just like to say a big thank you to Joe and Colin for 2 really interesting talks, and also thank you to everybody for attending. I really hope you've enjoyed today's talks and gained some valuable insights that you can take away as well. If you are interested in attending any of our events, then please visit our BJSS website and also look out on social media. We're also currently planning our events for September's Leeds Digital Festival, where we'll also be looking to mix it up. So looking at some hybrid events and also some face-to-face events as well. So please look out on both BJSS, Leeds Digital Festival website, and also social media for further information. And thank you very much for attending today. Thank you.
Cheers, bye.
Thanks very much. Bye.